Jump right in. Welcome to this explainer on the gatekeepers, decoding the CBN's guidance on politically exposed persons. Have you ever actually wondered what goes down behind the scenes at a bank when a high-ranking politician, or hey, even just their best friend, walks in to open an account? The financial system is basically our frontline defense against corruption and illicit money movement. Because let's face it, when dirty money flows unchecked, it drains public resources and hits everyday citizens right in the wallet. So today, we're going to decode exactly how that defense works using the June 2023 Central Bank of Nigeria's guidance notes. We're unpacking the super strict rules that financial institutions literally have to follow to stop the misuse of power for personal gain. And the ultimate architect of these crucial rules? The Central Bank of Nigeria, or the CBN. They mandate that all financial institutions under their watch comply with some seriously rigorous anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism regulations. The CBN sets the minimum standards, the absolute baseline, for how banks have to identify and manage the really unique risks that come with powerful individuals. They're the ones telling the banks exactly how high to set those security hurdles. All right, so here's our roadmap for today. We'll start by looking at the money laundering threat. Then we'll define who exactly a PEP is and how to evaluate their risk. After that, we'll dive into the rules of due diligence, how banks actually track these individuals, and finally, we'll look at the lifespan of a PEP. So let's kick things off with part one, the money laundering threat, and exactly why these rules are absolutely necessary. Politically exposed persons, or PEPs as they're called, bring some pretty massive financial crime risks to the table. The core threat here is that individuals holding prominent positions might misuse their power and influence to line their own pockets. But here's the kicker. It doesn't just stop with them. The CBN guidance explicitly calls out that these individuals might use their families or close associates to hide those illicit funds. It's kind of like a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. They might even use their clout to gain control of totally normal-looking legal entities just to hide money. And that makes the whole system super vulnerable to risks like money laundering, terrorist financing, and even the proliferation financing of weapons of mass destruction. Scary stuff, right? Moving on to part two, who exactly is a PEP? Let's identify the actors in this system. The official definition of a politically exposed person is actually quite specific. A PEP is someone entrusted with a prominent public position. But, and this is a really key takeaway for us, it refers to way more than just a customer's job title, rank, or pay grade. It's truly defined by a person's actual power or influence over decisions, policy, or how government funds are spent. It's about their functional reality, their actual leverage, not just the fancy nameplate on their door. Now, this brings up a pretty fascinating question. Does this risk and all the heavy banking scrutiny that comes with it apply only to the politicians themselves? Like, if a politician tries to hide money, are they the only ones the bank is keeping tabs on? Well, actually, no. The net of scrutiny extends way beyond the public official into what we call the PEP orbit. If you're a family member, say a spouse, a child, a son-in-law, a parent, or a sibling, you are automatically treated with enhanced scrutiny. But surprisingly, this net catches close associates too. We're talking widely known personal friends, business colleagues, and even personal advisors. Seriously, even a politician's regular golf buddy could trigger a bank audit. It also includes anyone who jointly owns a legal entity set up in favor of a PEP. Simply being caught in the gravitational pull of a powerful politician means you're going to face the exact same elevated hurdles at the bank. All right, part three, evaluating the PEP risk. How do banks actually weigh the danger? The central bank takes a very stark, uncompromising stance on this. According to their guidance, quote, in view of the corruption levels in Nigeria, domestic PEPs are rated highly vulnerable to financial risks. Therefore, by default, most domestic PEPs are considered high risk, unquote. I mean, they are not beating around the bush here. The baseline assumption for a domestic Nigerian politician walking into a local bank is immediate, high-level suspicion purely because of systematic corruption risks. And because of that rather blunt baseline assumption, there's a really distinct difference in how banks handle domestic versus foreign PEPs. Domestic PEPs, high risk by default, as we just saw. Foreign PEPs, on the other hand, or folks working for international organizations, well, they aren't automatically slapped with that highest threat level. Instead, they're categorized based on a customized case-by-case risk assessment by the financial institution itself. So the local context really dictates a much harsher default protocol. Now, beyond that default high-risk rating, banks are always on the lookout for specific red flags that elevate a PEP's threat level even further. For example, if a PEP has business interests related to their public function, which is a massive conflict of interest, that's a huge red flag. if they're involved in public procurement, or if they hold multiple roles that let them pull strings across several key decision-making processes, the risk absolutely skyrockets. And get this, the CBN specifically flags sectors known for higher corruption levels. We're talking oil and gas, mining, construction, defense, and, interestingly enough, even sports and gaming. If a PEP operates in those spaces, the bank's alarm bells are definitely ringing. Okay, let's move to part 4, rules of due diligence. These are the mandatory protocols banks have to follow. So, a PEP has to clear several hurdles chronologically just to establish and keep a banking relationship. First up is onboarding and self-declaration, where the bank uses questionnaires to figure out their status. Step 2 is absolutely crucial, senior management approval. A regular bank teller literally can't approve a PEP account. Someone way up the corporate ladder has to formally sign off and take personal responsibility for the money laundering and terrorism financing risk. Step 3 means the bank has to aggressively determine the exact source of the PEP's wealth and funds. If a public servant on a modest government salary suddenly deposits millions, the bank needs documented proof of exactly where it came from. And finally, step 4 is periodic review. The scrutiny literally never stops. Accounts are constantly monitored for any trigger events or unusual behavior. Which brings us nicely to part 5, how banks track PEPs. Let's look at their intelligence gathering. Behind the scenes, banks deploy this almost spy-like network of databases and monitoring tools. It's pretty wild. They pay for specialized commercial databases that constantly update lists of global PEPs and their known associates. They're also doing continuous media searches, scouring for any adverse news, scandals, or reports linking a client to corruption. On top of that, they rely on intelligence shared by competent authorities, basically government agencies that hand over specific data on high-risk individuals. And finally, they use internal databases, sharing vital intelligence across their own financial groups just to make sure a PEP doesn't try to hop from one branch to another unnoticed. And you know what? That oversight goes all the way to the top. The CBN guidance mandates that banks have to submit monthly returns on all transactions involving PEPs. This data is piped directly to the Central Bank of Nigeria and the NFIU, which is the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit. This strict rule ensures that national intelligence agencies have a constant, month-by-month pulse on exactly how much money is flowing through the accounts of the country's most powerful people and their entourages. Finally, we arrive at part 6, the lifespan of a PEP, and the big question of when this scrutiny actually ends. Well, the short answer is it's really not about the calendar. The guidance explicitly dispels that old myth of once a PEP, always a PEP. But it also flat out rejects using arbitrary time limits. A bank doesn't just stop monitoring an account exactly 365 days after a politician leaves office. Instead, a person's status depends entirely on their lingering informal influence, how senior their past roles were, and their ongoing political connections. To figure out if a former politician still poses a money laundering threat, banks use specific post-office evaluation criteria. They basically have to ask, can this person still pull strings and exercise informal influence behind the scenes? Are they formally or even informally linked to the person who took over their job? Do they still have heavy ties to those high corruption industries like oil, gas, or defense that we mentioned earlier? At the end of the day, the bank has to gauge exactly how politically connected the individual remains after handing over the official title. Because if the power remains, you better believe the banking scrutiny remains. So, in a system where power clearly transcends official job titles, and where family and friends are actively pulled into this orbit of scrutiny, simply stepping out of office is really just the beginning of a whole new phase of evaluation. It forces us to ask a pretty big question. In the modern financial world, does political influence and the immense risk that comes with it ever truly fade away?